every single map has an agenda. That agenda, it may be entirely benign, but it might not be. And it's loaded with bias. If I'm the creator of a visualization, right, I have decided what data to use in that visualization and what data not to use.
I'm Ran Dror, and this is Remake, a podcast about design, systems, and society. In each episode, I talk to someone who's trying to change our lives for the better in some meaningful way, whether through a new product, new venture, or a new way of looking at the world. And I try to understand how they came to it, what makes them tick, and what we can learn from them. Today I'm talking to Carissa Carter. Carissa is the author of The Secret Language of Maps. She's a designer, geoscientist, and academic director at the Stanford d.school. Carissa drives the d.school's pedagogy and teaches courses on the intersection of data and design, design for climate change, maps, and the visual sorting of information. And she helped lead the d.school's seminal Stanford 2025 project on the future of higher education. She pursues projects at the crossover between design, science, and emerging technology. We spoke in mid-August 2022, and I was looking forward to talking to Carissa since I got a hold of her book, The Secret Language of Maps, from the new Stanford d.school series of guides. Not only is the book beautifully designed and cleverly crafted, tracking a murder mystery through various maps and infographics, but it uses it to make great points about information, complexity, bias, and the role of the visual. I've long thought that many of humanity's hardest problems seem so pernicious precisely because they're too complex to model and understand through words alone. And I think that modeling and conveying complex information visually allows us to use our complex visual cortex to decipher complex, nuanced, and dynamic systems in an infinitely better and more accurate way. It was great to dive into some of these topics with Carissa, who had an interesting and unique journey to get to where she is today. We talked about her 6:06 p.m. tradition, where she takes a picture at the same time every day, and the value of documenting our lives in this way. How she learned the value of prototyping at a very young age. What drew her to geology and the relationship between geology and visualization. Her lateral move from geology to design and how that got her into designing maps. What is a map? Hint, it's broader than you think. The agenda of maps, the bias of data selection, the bias of interpreting data, the inclusivity of maps. Why she says maps are made of a mix of data, craft, and bias. A map of a world in proportion to the number of sheep in each country. The book, The Secret Language of Maps, and what made her write it, and many other topics. I think what stayed with me most is the incredible richness and craft that goes into making the best maps, the myriad creative and tactical choices that have to be made, and what these choices say about us, our values, and our intentions. This conversation is one of a dozen or so weekly conversations we already have lined up for you, with thinkers, designers, makers, authors, entrepreneurs, and activists who are working to change our world for the better. So follow this podcast on your favorite podcast app, or head over to remakepod.org to subscribe. And now, let's jump right in with Carissa Carter. All right, I'm sitting here across the screen with Carissa Carter. Carissa, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Aaron.
So these days, I like to start by just asking, what is it like to be you in the world today? Where are you at with your day-to-day work, your day-to-day life, everything coming together post-COVID? Where are you now?
let me take you up on the offer to talk in the many layers of my life. I'll start with where I am right now, which is in the basement of my house. My children have yet to go back to school for the year, so we're amping up for that. Also getting ready for the new academic year at Stanford. So planning to bring in a whole new set of design students in the coming year. And at the same time, I have been having a summer. I went on a trip to the east coast of the U.S. to Cape Cod and New Hampshire, and it was fun to be in an environment that's different from the California that I live in. And you're catching me at a time when I have been writing a lot, reading a lot, and also doing a lot of thinking and planning as to what's the world that I hope to exist in the future. Climate and our deteriorating landscape is top of my mind. And so, I'll say I'm somebody that is considering the many layers of life at the same time and also trying to keep it all together.
So do you still do the 6:06 p.m. thing? What's
sure
the deal with that? Yeah.
It is my longest running project. So for the last 12 years now, at 6:06 p.m., I take a photograph. And I have an alarm that goes off. It's very simple. Wherever I am, I take a picture of what's happening. It's not usually a picture of me. It's usually a picture of what I'm doing or the people that I'm with. And then I write a caption for it and I catalog it. I am not sure what I am doing with this yet. I thought maybe I would decide at 10 years, and then 10 years came and I decided to just keep going. So it's an incredible catalog of my life at a really fun, tiny moment in time. I love it.
Oh, yeah. I love that too. I have something similar, but it's less methodical. I used to date a surgeon who is always, in the hospital. And I would go for walks in the park every morning, and she would be in the hospital most of the time. So I'd always take a photo from the park of some dog or some leaf or something every morning, one photo. And those are still some of my favorite photos. Yeah. Unfortunately, it was relationship dependent. So I stopped doing it once the relationship ended. But I think I should maybe get back to it. So what have you learned anything from 6:06 p.m.? Have you seen any patterns or?
Oh, it's unreal, right? Because it's this one tiny, point of your day. And the reason that I use 6:06 is because it's a time of day when you may not be doing the same thing every day. You may still be working or home or out and about. It's also a time where throughout the year, the light changes. And therefore, the way that the landscape looks around you will vary. My favorite example of how a year in your life can shift is there is a 6:06 taken the day that my older son was born. And on that day, he hadn't come out yet, but I was in the hospital in labor. The year prior, exactly 1 year prior at 6:06, there's a photo of my feet, and I am sitting on a curb, and there's a pile of corn nuts next to me. And the caption just says, "Sitting on the curb eating corn nuts." And the fact that a year later you could have a child.
Yeah. Wow.
Right? You can never predict that stuff. It's we all know how much our life changes, but it's really cool to look at that tiny slice in time to see how it changes.
Yeah, this is so cool. I would imagine also it's that time where, if you have a busy period at work, then for days on end, you're still at the office. And then suddenly you have a more relaxed period where you're at home you're on your way to doing something fun and you can actually see it visually probably.
Exactly, right? You can see your life pulse in and out. The other fascinating thing is because I've been doing this for so long, the tools and the technology that we have to examine it have rapidly evolved. I mean, I started 6:06 when I had a BlackBerry, right? that was what was taking my pictures. Wow. And, me writing a caption and searching the the key words in my text was the way that I could look through it. And now we have tools that can search my images for patterns and people and phenomena. On one hand, I want to use all that and see what I have. And on the other hand, I'm so curious as to what tools we'll have next that you almost don't want to look back now. So will I ever finish 606? I don't know. There's something to the longevity of it that is appealing to me too.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's amazing. So as a way into what you're doing today, we always like to kind of learn more about the person and their journey. So my opening question of that journey is, what's something you learned in childhood or early in life that still drives you today or guides you today?
It's a deep question to lead off with. All right, I have a specific anecdote. When I was much younger, growing up, a kid, there was a period in time when I thought that I wanted a dog. We weren't a family that had a dog, had no experience with it. And my parents didn't want a dog. But they were always very willing to indulge and let us explore our interests. I'm very grateful for that. And so my dad said, okay, we're going to pretend that we have a dog for a week. And if you do an incredible job taking care of that dog, then we'll get a real dog. And so by pretend, he meant like we had an imaginary dog. And this imaginary dog would wake me up, at 6 a.m. to take it on walks. It would have accidents on the rug that I would have to clean up. It allowed me to play with it, but it also required that I did all of the chores associated with it. I think you probably know where this is going. By the end of the week, I didn't need a dog anymore. And it was not only like a brilliant parenting move, but the lesson that I have always taken from that is a bit twofold. Like one piece of it is try on aspects of your life, take on opportunities. There's ways to prototype what you'd like to experience, and you should do that, right? You should push yourself, and it's okay to pull back from what you thought you wanted. And I think that has kind of left me with a spirit of, in my role as an educator, how am I inspiring others to try things, to try on aspects of work or projects or pieces of themselves that they didn't necessarily, maybe they thought that's the way they want to go, like I wanted that dog, but maybe they're not sure about it. And I try to do that with myself and with everybody that I'm interacting with.
Yeah, that's amazing. You learned the value of prototyping so early, and now you're in the d.school, where that's a core principle.
Exactly, right. Without even really knowing what design or prototyping was, like that spirit of trying is something that I do think I've taken from childhood.
Yeah, interesting. And do you feel like, that was a true experiment in the sense that, or was the experience biased towards making dogs seem really extra hard so that you don't get one?
1000%. This was a genius move on their part to make it very clear that there's a lot of work with taking care of a pet, and that wasn't the kind of pet they wanted to take on.
Yeah.
But they let it be my decision, which was really cool.
Yeah, that is a cool move. So you started by studying geology. I'm a pretty blank slate when it comes to geology. I know it's about rocks and sediment layers. That's all I know. I haven't thought about it either way. I don't have an opinion. I don't know if it's cool or not. Help me understand what drew you to it and get me excited about geology.
Okay, let me just start by saying, yeah, it's cool, right? Look around wherever you are. That landscape has been shaped by nature. It has been shaped by humans. It has been shaped before humans were here, and we are coexisting with it. And so geology encompasses this entire planet that holds up our existence. And like any discipline, there are so many subsets of it. The part that I focused on, that I get most excited about, is geomorphology, the processes that shape our landscape. So rivers and glaciers that direct, in very current impact on the landscape. I love the pieces of geology that you can see. As a geologist, right, when you study geomorphology, you can look at a landscape and know what happened beforehand. You can look at a valley, and the shape of a valley can tell you. If it's shaped like a U, you know that was glaciated in the past. If it's shaped like a V, that's only ever been cut through by a river. So there's a magic to me in being able to investigate and decipher how we are interacting with the planet and the processes that it uses to define itself, especially in an era, right, when we know that humans are altering our climate and that we are in dire consequences right now. Yet we still build on barrier islands that they're not meant to have homes on them. They're not meant to have structures on them. If you don't know how nature works, how it likes to evolve itself, then, how can we coexist?
Yeah, that's fascinating. And I never thought of looking at the landscape and understanding where it came from. And I think probably California is a great place to do it because nature is very visible. Whereas, in Tel Aviv, where I'm from, first of all, it's pretty flat and it's covered in houses. Like you can't really see nature.
But it's there, right? Right? I don't know the exact geology of Tel Aviv. I'd love to look it up. I mean, I think that there are so many, unique features of every place. You can see geology happening, but then also experience it.
So now that I'm thinking about it, geology does feel like one of these fields where it's almost too large, too complex for the human brain to comprehend just verbally. Like you have to start drawing something to start understanding the complex structures. So is that where your interest in maps came from? Is that where your interest in visualizations came from?
I think that's definitely a part of it, right? Geology is incredibly interdisciplinary, right? You have to be able to build, when I say 3D, maybe it's like multidimensional because it's multidisciplinary models of how a landscape is evolving. I did a bunch of work on slot canyons, so the narrow canyons, many of them in the arid southwest of the United States that have cool undulating wall forms. You have to be able to figure out how to model something like that physically and numerically and take observations. It's almost investigating. It's investigating the system of the world around you. There's definitely visualization threads and design threads that I have felt moving from geology career into a design one.
So what made you realize that geology was not the only thing that you wanted to do? What was that process like?
I obviously love science and this ultimate pursuit of a tiny slice of truth of what's happening to explain a natural phenomena in the world. I absolutely love that. But it didn't feel like that was what I wanted to devote everything for. And I had a mentor, David Rubin at the USGS, who's a brilliant and famous sedimentologist. He was the one that was like, what else is there? Where do you want to take this? You don't have to do exactly what every other scientist has done. And at the same time, just by chance, I had discovered the design program at Stanford. I actually think it was my mom that had found a link to it. And we're in early days, right? This is early 2000s at this point, 2002, 2003. I didn't even know design was a thing, but just discovering that there was that possibility to be somebody that made things and that explained things in the world beyond just the science that I was used to, having that encouragement to explore, that made all the difference for me. I essentially took a leap and thought, hey, let me try and see if design is a thing for me. I also remember, a very specific moment here. I think I was in my very first design course, David Kelly, who's still somebody that I look up to and collaborate with daily, was talking about different ways that designers operate and different modes of abstraction on ideas and synthesis. And the building that this was happening in has since been torn down, but like I can still see where I was sitting, where it occurred to me that design was a totally different way to approach problems than the scientific method. And not one better or worse, but like that in concert, they could produce something pretty interesting.
This is super interesting. So this brings me to your book, The Secret Language of Maps. And so I have it here with me. So I'll say a couple of things about it before I ask you a question. So one is it's incredibly fun. It's a murder mystery wrapped in a kind of theoretical book about maps that's extremely fun and illustrated, and also like a how-to guide, which is really fun, I find, with like how to create a map, like, and it's like starting from just the ideation, then you introduce every possible variable that you could change and play with. So it's just a gorgeous book. It feels really integrated, and it feels really like I'm going through something by reading this book. There's like an arc to it. So awesome. What made you write this book, and what were you hoping to convey to people?
I fundamentally believe that anything can be mapped, and by both making maps to understand ideas for yourself, as well as making maps or visualizations, anything in that realm, to convey, to explain a concept. Both maps to explore and explain are really useful tools for designers or for anyone. And the idea of the murder mystery as the through line to explain the story is about pulling you in an unexpected way. It wasn't really wanting to write a book that would just be a reference book, but like one that you would feel excited to have on your bedside table and at work. So that was the impetus behind it.
And it works beautifully because you need to get people interested in a really complex set of facts that you can examine from different points of view and with different maps. And a murder mystery is exactly that, right? It gives you clues over time, and then you're trying to put it together. And in the better detective stories, there's a way for you to actually figure this out if you put it together in the right way. You know, you start with geographical maps, and then you go into timelines and to every possible visualization as you get more and more data. It's a beautiful book. So I want to ask you, what is a map to you?
It's a great question because I use that term really broad in an inclusive way. So a map can be geographic, it can be an infographic, it can be a framework, it can be a data story. It is broadly any visualization where you are presenting the information visually and arranging it spatially. A list of things is not a map. You know, even if you're just listing pictures in a row, like use the spatial. What does it mean to use that spatial dimension? And what does it mean to visualize your idea? But I think like part of that for me was like wanting to welcome anybody that was interested in exploring information visualization into this world. And so whatever you want to call it, great. Like I like map as the word, but welcome to anybody's words.
Yeah, it's interesting that like design, map is both a noun and a verb. You can map something or map out something. And so it's a really interesting concept. You know, and we're now we have listeners who are not designers. We have listeners who maybe are more interested in politics or activism or, you know, or different things. Why should they care about maps? Let's say people who are not inherently interested in making infographics. Why should they care about it?
Well, data, which is one of the key components of every single map and visualization, that you may encounter in your everyday lives by reading the news, but certainly that people around you are using to make decisions that shape all of our world. So data is absolutely everywhere. You can't separate that from our lives. And so you have to know too that the people reading that data and working with it to make decisions or make these visualizations, right, are human and they show up in their work. One of the things that's really important for me to share and impress upon others, right, is that every single map has an agenda. That agenda, it may be entirely benign, but it might not be. And it's loaded with bias. If I'm the creator of a visualization, right, I have decided what data to use in that visualization and what data not to use. Maybe that decision was made by what was available to me, or maybe I wanted to be more manipulative with what I wanted to show. But, somebody made a decision.
Yeah.
And then if you're the one reading that visualization that I made or consuming it or making a decision based on what it shows, right? You're going to have your own reactions to it based on where in the world you are, the culture that you're from, the context you're in now, your own beliefs and experiences with the topic that visualization's about. So maps, data, it's everywhere. We all should know and care.
Yeah. I have a couple of things that I want to throw in the mix here. So one thing is maps as a way of coming to an agreement, because visualizations are often, they're very inclusive in a way that text isn't, in a sense that, this whole field of graphic facilitation where, okay, everybody just say what you see and we will draw the problem and we won't throw away any feedback. And point of view is going to find its way into the diagram. And then we're going to look at it together. And something about that can dissolve tensions and dissolve friction and disagreements because we can look at a shared picture.
We can look at a shared picture and appreciate the differences in each of our perspectives on it or on a topic. One of my favorite prompts to give students is you say, you give them one blank sheet of paper and you say, go ahead and make me a map of your neighborhood. Okay, so everybody's gotten that same prompt. And the only other info you get, right, is you have this piece of paper. The boundaries of the paper are the ends of your neighborhood. Give them 10 minutes to draw. What you get back is so diverse, right? Some people draw the neighborhood that they grew up in when they were 3 years old that holds prominence for them, and others draw where they are now. Some people have entire town on there. Other people include just within their one apartment complex. And some people center themselves in the middle of the paper. Others don't even put themselves on it. How you orient it, what's up, usually shows what's prominent. Is it north? Is it geographic? Or is something else the thing that has always been the orienting structure for them? And then how they label it. So some people will label this is apartment 2B and this is Goodwin Avenue over here, right? This is what is. And other people will annotate with, the guy that always grumbles on me sits on this corner. And this is the curb that I trip on 3 times a day, even though I know it's there. What you get is this from a same prompt of what is a neighborhood. You get fundamentally different pictures that are all valid, all show the truth, the bias of the person that drew it.
Right.
And it's fascinating to look at those together.
Yeah, that's super interesting. It's I would get fascinated if we could somehow map them on top of each other and create a layered map that you could explore together, and we can start benefiting from each other's maps, right?
Yeah, right. How, if I could dive into your neighborhood, right, I would see the world through your eyes. And what did you decide to include on that map of your neighborhood? Yeah. And what was entirely left out? I mean, it's just funny, people will leave out, 3 streets, but add a street that's 4 away from them because they always went over there to meet a friend. Right. And so, it's a great example of the data that you're including or not including in the decisions that the creator makes.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And I want to get to that in a second. I want to say one more thought about the importance of maps. I come from a Buddhist studies background, and the Buddhists are very strong on pointing out the limitations of language, of verbal descriptions. And in their most philosophical texts, it's all about a world that's interdependent, dynamic. Things don't really have an inherent fixed nature. They're flowing into each other all the time. There's this understanding that words are always missing out something. Words are leaving out something. And I know that's true of maps too, because you have to leave some things out, but it's a way to include more. They're more inclusive. They allow for complexity.
I totally agree with that. Right. And you can choose that degree of complexity. You can dial it up. You can take it back down. Pictures, maps allow us to see things that you just can't get with text. Not to mention that there's a lot of people have trouble processing text and reading it, but yet couldn't see things in the visual and the spatial. And so it's another way to include people that may be left out if you only are using the text, the narrative.
You're listening to Remake, a podcast about design, systems, and society. If you're listening on a podcast app, you already know how to follow podcasts. So please follow this one. If you're listening in a browser, just go to remakepod.org to find links to all the major podcast players where you can follow our show. And so in the book, you talk about data, craft, and bias as the 3 parts of a map, like the 3 things that make a map. So we spoke a little bit about bias, but in what way? You said every map has an agenda. What's the dynamic there? How does it work? How can we be more aware of it?
Yeah. So data, craft, bias. That is the key framework for the book. And if you look at any data story, any visualization, any map of any kind, you can piece apart how those 3 things are interacting with each other. Think of the Venn diagram of the 3 of those overlapping. They are in creative tension with each other. You tug on one and it's going to affect the others. There's no perfect map out there. There's no perfect visualization out there. There's always those 3 elements interacting with each other. Before I mentioned the data is about what is the information that is being shown and what's included and not included. The bias comes from both the creator and the viewer of the map. Is it explicit or implicit? Is it hidden or obvious, harmful or harmless? And then the craft is how it's made. What does that visualization look like? Is it hand-drawn and rough, or is it precise? Where is it shown? Is it huge and plastered on a building? Or is it something you're consuming on a phone or in a meeting? What tools were used to make it? Is it something that was made with materials beyond like actual physical materials? Or is it drawn with color? Colors have a lot of meaning in themselves. So many decisions about craft go into what the meaning of a map is as well. So it's about the 3 of those interacting, and you can pull on the levers of any at any time, and you can actually use any of those 3 angles as a way to decide what to make or to craft your own data story.
Yeah, it's so interesting. Coming from the startup world, I can almost imagine the data scientist, the designer, and I don't know, maybe the UX or the product person. And, the designer just wants to make it pretty and great looking. And then the data scientist is like, whoa, like you're misrepresenting the data. You're going too far. And then you're going to scale them back. And then the product person says, this is the lesson I want them to get. And so it's like, you have to change the design to convey this very clearly. And then the data scientist and the designer are pushing back. And you have that illustration in the book where they're like wrestling, three people wrestling.
Yeah. Yeah, they're like, one of them is poking the ear of the other and pinching each other. I mean, because it is a wrestle.
Yeah. And it's I guess it's the wrestling of life, because dealing with data is so foundational to who we are as people and how we make decisions. And all of these desires are completely valid, right?
Right.
Make it clearer, and
they are.
Yeah, they're completely valid. Not that you necessarily always mean a geographical map, but I think the different projection maps for geographical maps are really a good example of that, with the Mercator map, which is the map we all know, being essentially they're trying to show us what it would look like on a globe, and it's a way of projecting it on 2D. But there are other ways of doing that, right? And the Peters map is more correct on the relative sizes, but it's a completely different shape than what it looks like when you look at a globe, right?
Absolutely, right. The projections that you're talking about show like the relationship of some land masses to each other, but totally skew the actual area of those land masses.
Right.
You can decide what is going to be, I use that term base framework, which essentially means what's the thing that is going to hold prominence in how you are presenting that data. From the Amazing Map Twitter handle, I found, a great world map that shows the world in proportion to sheep.
Nice.
And when you look at the map of that, the US and Canada are these tiny little skinny structures, right?
And yet,
yeah, but China and Mongolia are huge, and New Zealand has swelled, and there's parts of East Africa that have swelled, right? And so it's just clearly a great example of if that's the thing that you're biasing for, this is what the world looks like. And so it allows you to isolate, things like that allow you to see the power of isolating a variable and what you've chosen to highlight as most important in any map.
Nice. So let's talk about craft. So I'm wondering, what are your favorite, best crafted maps that you've seen? Any examples there?
I think that the infographic artist, Mona Chalabai, is obviously one of my favorites. She's a hand-drawn infographic artist, and she takes very complex social issues and figures out a very human way to represent them. And there are many videos of her talking about her style and the way that she works out there. And I encourage you to listen to it from her words. But one of the points that she talks about is how the reason that she uses a hand-drawn style is because a lot of our data are imprecise. The number of people that have experienced homelessness, we have an idea, but we don't know for sure, right? There's a lot of error bars on the data that we collect. And by presenting that hand-drawn, it conveys the amount of uncertainty in a phenomenon. And it brings a humanity to how the data is presented and represented. And so I think that she does that just absolutely brilliantly.
Wow.
I have other favorite infographic artists too, but in terms of a modern living person really setting the bar, I would give it to her.
Wow, amazing. Okay, we'll take a look at that. So I want to take us to an idealized future where humanity got better at mapping and reading and communicating visually. And let's say that the book had the effect that it was intended to. And, what world could it be? What are we hoping to see?
We're hoping to see a world where people design for healing. People design knowing that anything they put into the world will eventually break, and we are equipped to fix it. I think maps aside, our hubris as humans has really gotten in our way to create for longevity. And I would love to see us using all of the tools, all of the information, all of the data around us to put things into the world with knowing that they may take a path unexpected to us for whatever reasons we can't predict now, but that we are prepared to deal with them as they come about.
Yeah, it's lovely. There's a couple of projects that you're involved with that I think are interesting examples of that. So one of them is I Love Algorithms. So help me understand what that is.
I Love Algorithms is part of a larger body of work around emerging technologies that we're working on at the D.school. And essentially, it comes from the premise that as designers, you can pretty much envision, if I gave you cardboard, you could mock up what a chair might look like, right? So it's so that chair is not eventually going to be made as cardboard. It's a material to try out.
Right.
However, when we have these new materials that are like algorithms and blockchains and synthetic biology, these emerging technologies, they are what we call mischievous materials, right? They continue to create themselves after we interact with them. They scale really quickly and often behave in ways that we can't even backtrack and understand. Yet our world is increasingly being made of these things, of these new materials of making. And so algorithms are one of them. So how can we as designers get better at prototyping with algorithms? And most of us, designers or anyone really, we're not going to be the coder. We're not going to be that tech person that knows the latest and how to actually do that, all the full programming. However, you have to know how those algorithms work. So the mantra I really like is you don't have to know the code. You have to know what the code can do.
Yeah.
And so I Love Algorithms is a tool that we've created to break down common kinds of machine learning algorithm. And it explains each algorithm in a cartoon form, in a simple text form, and in the form of questions you might find yourself having if this is the kind of algorithm for you. And it's fun and it's playful, and it allows you to say, I wonder if a reinforcement learning type algorithm and this kind of data set that I have available could bring what into the world. So it allows you to fill in the blank with algorithms and data, and is really accessible to anybody as a way of understanding how algorithms might have an impact in their world. It would be scary if a classification algorithm and data on school dropouts could be used to determine who got a job in the future, right? You're trying on algorithms and data sets and seeing in different ways how they might interact together.
Yeah.
So I think it's important for us as designers to be making these prototyping tools and making them accessible to a wide range of people, because if we want the tech to represent all of us, it has to be created by all of us.
Yeah. No, that's a wonderful sentiment. And there's actual cards. There's a PDF with the cards that you can download on the d.school's website and print out. And I looked at them. They're quite useful. And I hope this is like a long-term project, because I'm sure new algorithms are emerging all the time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. And then Rep Magazine is another interesting project that I've seen that I feel like has a similar goal. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, Rep is another D.school project, and it is geared to begin with the 8th grade and up set of learners. It's a physical magazine that really looks at equity in emerging tech, each issue breaks down a different emerging technology and gives you ways to do little exercises to understand how it works on a systems level, on an experience level, on a product level, on a tech level, on a data level, and wrestle with a lot of the big questions that you might find yourself having if you're working with that technology in different ways. So we have one on voice bots, Siri and Google Voice, OK Google. The next issues are blockchain and synthetic biology and machine learning. We're working to get that full set out and distributed to students. And I'll say too that like the analog nature of working with it is key to it. So often we assume you need the device, right? The high tech to work with the high tech. And one of our key drivers is that this should be available to anybody at low tech. We can think through these ideas and understand how they work in the analog.
So that's in order to not leave people behind who are not like know where to search online and find those materials.
Absolutely. I mean, there is no reason to continue to marginalize anybody because of their access to technology. This is about bringing more people in to be creators with the tech, no matter what they have access to right now.
That's amazing. So I have two final questions for you. The first is, you call yourself an awkwardness enthusiast. You said you enjoy awkward moments. I thought when I read that, how can I engineer an awkward moment? But I don't know that you can make it happen. But tell me more about that.
I have always loved people dynamics. And we have all found those times when you feel out of place for whatever reason. And, you get to, it's either something like age related or experience related that like you cross over and it's like, okay, I am like really a fish out of water right now. And I just like, why those awkward moments happen, it could be like you're within a different context, a different culture, you don't know the norms of behaving in a certain organization, you behave differently, maybe somebody near you is doing it. There's something about watching the nuances of human behavior that I think most designers geek out on in a certain way because it drives what we make, right? That's where opportunities are. And so I enjoy it. I'm an awkwardness enthusiast.
Give me like an example of a really top shelf awkward moment.
Let's see. Okay. My sister will kill me for sharing this example, but here we go. She had one years ago where she had gotten a haircut. And this is back before you tipped on the credit card, like when there was an era when you tip with cash after a haircut. At least many women's haircuts that we have experienced have gone that way. And she called me afterwards in utter embarrassment because she said, okay, she had her haircut, and then at the time the dynamic was you pay up front and then you walk back to your stylist and you give them the tip in cash. That was the expected norm for women's haircuts at that time. And she said like her stylist was already working with the next client and was washing this woman's hair, so like kind of leaning over the sink. And my sister said, well, what I did was I just took the money and shoved it right in her back pocket. And she said that the stylist like perked up, like, what is happening? And she said, the minute I did it, I was cringing. Like, how could I have thought that was the way to pass along? I'm just trying to give her tip, but her hands were wet. And it's just a thought that, so we've all had that moment where we behaved. It's like you realize, oh my God, I was entirely inappropriate. Yeah. For whatever reason, not really intentionally, but it happened. And then you like, how you ever come back from that? Do you ever get a haircut again? So to me, like that is when we can make fun of ourselves when we've done something cringy for whatever reason, like those are my favorite awkward moments.
Nice. That's awesome. Yeah. That's awesome. I'm trying to.
Steffi, I am so sorry for telling that story.
Yeah, that's funny. So now I'm going to take it in a more serious direction. So this is our usual closing for an episode. So in his TED Talk, the philosopher Alain de Botton talks about the difference between a lecture and a sermon. A lecture being kind of a modern, dry here's a bunch of facts, you make up your own mind what to do with them. And a sermon, which he really calls for, he would like to see more sermons in the world, is an urgent plea to shake someone out of their complacency and change their life for the better. And so if you had an opportunity to give a short sermon, what would it be about?
I would talk about how everything is interconnected. Whether you see yourself as a creator or a maker of things, physical or digital products, whether you are somebody that makes experiences, designs experiences and interactions for people, whether you are someone who creates a system, a way for people to participate on a larger scale. Maybe you're somebody that makes technology or somebody that gathers data. I think that data, tech, products, experiences, and systems, no matter where you participate in that spectrum, all of those layers are interconnected, and they're all surrounded by the implications of bringing your work into the world. So no matter where you think you are in that entire landscape, your work matters. It has an effect. It has a lasting effect. It has ways that it hits each of those other layers. And so we have to be better at understanding the interconnections and the ripple effects of what we put into the world.
Wow. That's a thought to stay with. Thank you so much, Carissa. I appreciate your time today. This was lovely.
Thank you so much for having me, Aaron. It was really fun to talk with you.
Remake is produced by myself and Regina Rothstein. Research and editing by Louis Brady. And audio engineering by Greg Kokoveos. If you enjoyed the podcast, please consider writing a 5-star review in Apple's podcast or wherever you're listening. It helps many more people discover the podcast and also just makes us feel good. Current support for the podcast comes from my own design company, Remake Labs. We're a global strategic design sprint agency aimed at improving outcomes through repeated and rapid design interventions. Now, until next time, be well everyone, and see you next week on Remake.